Yes, this is really important. Asian Americans were redlined from opening businesses in white neighborhoods because white people didn't want Asian Americans operating in their neighborhoods and didn't want Asian Americans profiting off of white people. But because the positionality of Asian Americans is weaponized to oppress Black people, Asian Americans were being given loans to open businesses in Black communities, even though Black people were not able to receive loans to open businesses in their own communities. And as I've said before, as a result of this, Black wealth is essentially paid out twice when it goes to Asian American businesses. Once when the individual pays for the goods or services, and then again when the Asian American business owner removes the profit from the community. Because usually people open businesses in their own communities, and this is mutually beneficial, where the business owner is making a livelihood off of providing goods and services to their community. And by being a member of the community, they're contributing and they're investing back into the community. This is an ideal situation, and that is not what happens with Asian American businesses operating in Black communities. Obviously, the issue of Asian American owned businesses operating in Black communities is a huge source of tension because it is part of the daily violence faced by Black people in their own communities when they are disrespected as customers, to the literal physical violence, as was the case of the salon in Brooklyn, where a Black woman was locked into the salon by workers while they beat her with broomsticks, to the damage done to the psyches of particularly Black children when they are accused of shoplifting. And this isn't a topic that I'm going to be able to cover in one video, but it is a conversation that I do want to start. I think that if you ask some people what was the source of the tension, they'll say the LA riots and what happened in Koreatown, but you cannot mention the LA riots without recognizing the unaliving of Latasha Harlins the year before. A 15-year-old girl who was unalived by an Asian shop owner who thought that she was shoplifting orange juice, but the money to pay for the orange juice was in her hand when she was unalived. To overlook that is to value profit and property over Black bodies, which is at the root of the United States systemically racist system and capitalism. But I think that we have to go all the way back to the Civil Rights Amendment of 1964 and then the opening of Asian immigration in 1965. So in 1964, white power structure almost faced accountability to Black people. Black people should have started to be able to receive loans to open businesses in their own communities. But instead, in 1965, the United States opened the door to Asian immigration, and redlining meant that Asian Americans were receiving business loans, but only to open businesses in Black communities, and Black people were still not receiving loans to open businesses in their own communities. So where you have this weaponized positionality of Asian Americans being put in Black people's way, of course you are going to have resentment not only over the supplanted opportunity to open businesses in their communities, but also over the fact that the Black dollar is now being paid out twice. Once when the customer pays for the goods or services, and then again when the Asian business owner removes that wealth from the Black community. And I frequently heard the tension being framed as mutual misunderstanding, where these Asian shop owners didn't know about the civil rights struggles of Black people, and Black people were not familiar with the culture of Asian business owners. But I don't think that it can be framed as mutual misunderstanding where there is an uneven power dynamic. You have one demographic that is the business owners, and you have the other demographic that is having to pay. So where there is uneven power, I don't think that it's accurate to frame it as mutual misunderstanding. There's no logic involved in hate, and I don't think it's logical for Asian Americans and Black people to think that we hate each other. However, I felt that it was important to initially address those questions to acknowledge that there are members of both communities that feel hate coming from others, so that we can take an honest look at what's going on in reality that causes those feelings of animosity. I think a lot of us are indoctrinated into taking a carceral approach when met with conflict. So, in dealing with tension between communities, our first instinct is to deny harm and deny existence of hard feelings. And then, when confronted with it, to engage in a balancing of rights and wrongs and to make justifications and excuses because we believe that there has to be a determination that somebody is good and somebody is bad. And that's by design of white supremacy culture. That's what keeps us divided. In order to perceive ourselves and our communities as good, we have to perceive the other community as bad, and that causes us to view the other community through the lens of only their most extreme, problematic, and traumatized individuals. And that's how it comes to be that one person does something bad and all of a sudden it's attributed to the entire community. And then the other thing that does is we believe that as long as somebody is bad, that they are not deserving of support. I think it's really important in dealing with tension between communities to employ a restorative approach because that would allow both communities to remain focused that we share root cause harm in white supremacy culture and that the solution is to work to make each other whole. So for Asian Americans, that involves unlearning racial prejudice, combating anti-Blackness when we see it in our communities, debunking the model minority myth, and not being complicit in having our positionality weaponized. So as I said yesterday, Asian Americans need to say that we do not condone having anti-Asian hate crimes used as a means to fund an inherently unfair policing system. And in cities like New York, San Francisco, and Oakland, where we're seeing a concerning pattern of Black individuals attacking Asian Americans, I think that it would be so important if members of the Asian American and Black communities could organize together to employ a restorative approach when events like that happen. Because as has been pointed out, a lot of the perpetrators are struggling with homelessness and mental illness. Again, both communities are not a monolith, so we're just not really sure what's going on or who are doing these things. And although negative stereotypes would have people believe that this is in pattern for Black men, it is not. There is something going on there that is not going to be addressed by our current policing system that both communities would benefit from working together to figure out. Last week, I attempted to answer the very loaded question of why Asian Americans hate Black people in very generalized and broad terms. And the reason why I chose to answer that question where it was at is because I believe when you open a hand in a gesture of understanding, you don't do it with a closed fist. And I felt that if I had rephrased the question in a way that was palatable for me to answer and said, I don't really think that there's hate, then it would have felt like gaslighting, which wouldn't open a conversation. But now that the conversation is open, I would like to go back and add some more nuance and depth so that we can reach a deeper understanding and hopefully move forward. I think it's important to acknowledge that the Asian American community and the Black community are not monoliths. Our experiences are widely varying. And reflected in that is my belief that there is not a general sense of hatred from Asian Americans towards Black people, so much as we represent a spectrum of racial prejudices based on our individual experiences, ranging anywhere from overtly racist and harmful to unpacking an implicit bias and making sure that we are not complicit in upholding white supremacy culture. But I do think that the one-sided oppression that the Black community feels coming from the Asian American community is rooted firmly in the model minority myth, which is a tool of white supremacy culture used to oppress the Black community. And it's not so much that the model minority myth grants white privilege to Asian Americans because Asian Americans are preferred under white supremacy culture. I think it's that it grants conditional white proximity to Asian Americans for the purpose of weaponizing Asian American positionality against the Black community. And while new wave immigrants may have arrived in the country with racial prejudice that they acquired in their countries of origin, there is no way that they could have known how their positionality was going to be weaponized against the Black community. And I think that that's most strongly felt in the Asian American businesses being run in Black neighborhoods. It's also important to note that the model minority myth itself marginalizes a lot of Asian Americans because a lot of Asian Americans don't fit the model itself. In fact, most Asian Americans do not. And other examples of how the model minority myth has been used not so much out of care for Asian Americans, but out of gain for white supremacy culture. Initially, when Asian immigration opened up, it's not because the United States really wanted Asian people here. They wanted access to the most educated Asian students, but it also wanted a source of cheap labor so that it did not have to pay Black laborers a fair wage. And with Japanese American reparations, it's not so much that the United States felt remorse for what it had done to Japanese Americans during World War II, as it needed to improve its reputation with Japan, which was becoming an economic superpower. And ways in which that conditional white proximity can be stripped away to make Asian Americans vulnerable was seen when Detroit auto factories closed and white workers who were laid off were taking their aggressions out on Asian Americans. And then again in 2020, when frustration about the pandemic and concerns about the Asian American community organizing around BLM caused anti-Asian rhetoric and hate crimes to spike coming from the white nationalist community. And there are some Asian Americans who do feel that the hate crime bill was not signed to have any practical effect in addressing anti-Asian hate crime so much as a performative measure taken to say that the issue is done with. And I think it's important to realize that it's taken many years of hindsight to understand the mechanism by which Asian American positionality is weaponized against the Black community. And I acknowledge that a way forward is for us to be very aware of it, and that dismantling white supremacy will dismantle that system of weaponized privilege. I hope that makes more sense. Hey everybody, before I answer this question, I just wanted to say that I did not expect the volume of attention that some of my recent videos received, and I very much appreciate the support and the sharing and the contributions in the comment section. It's been a little overwhelming for me to lose the ability to give individual attention to each comment. Because I consider myself a student of the comment section. I like to be able to acknowledge support, differing perspectives, resource and information sharing, and the questions that guide my learning and growth individually. And I'm not able to, but I hope that my actions will show that I do not take any of that for granted. The other thing is it concerns me a little bit that the one video is getting so much attention because it was a 3-minute, very general summary trying to touch upon a lot of difficult information. And of course, it lacks nuance and depth. So thank you to those of you who understood that it was just the beginning of a conversation, and for those of you willing to continue with me. I very much appreciate it. So with this question, just a little bit of a background about me. I'm Asian American and I'm first generation born, and I don't have a lot of ties to my Asian roots, which does not mean that I don't know anything about my culture. That's a thing that a lot of Asian Americans in America face, is sort of being viewed as not American enough to be accepted in America, but also being told that we don't have enough connection to our Asian roots to know anything about our culture and to be accepted as Asian, and that's difficult. But of course, the Asian American experience is widely varying, and with this question in particular, it's not something that I felt qualified to speak on. But from receiving information from people in the comment section, what I would say is, yes, a lot of Asian countries subscribe to colorism and have caste systems. So in those countries, people are discriminated against on the color of their skin. And as an example, in the United States, I'm pretty much a pale complected person, but when I'm in Asia, I do receive comments about being dark. The other thing that I learned is that when the United States engaged in military actions overseas, white and black soldiers were segregated, and oftentimes white soldiers would teach people in these countries racial slurs, and would spread negative stereotypes about them. So then, of course, those negative stereotypes spread through those countries. And I think that is the source of anti-Blackness in Asian countries. I acknowledge it, and that is my understanding of the situation. So I hope that helps. Please be patient with me because there's so much here. I think the quick answer is that Asian Americans are given white privilege, especially the Asian Americans who fit the model minority stereotype. The quid pro quo for receiving that privilege is upholding white supremacy culture, which means being anti-Black. I was talking with somebody last night who was pointing out that the Civil Rights Amendment was passed in 1964. But also in the 1960s, the United States opened the door to Asian immigration. So now you have an influx of racial minorities who knew nothing about the history of white violence against Black people, knew nothing about the Black civil rights movement. So they arrived with civil rights, not understanding how that came to be. Um, and also, it effectively erased the United States' own anti-Asian history because Asian Americans came in not necessarily knowing about the Chinese Exclusion Act or the internment of Japanese Americans in the United States during World War II. And I think that Asian Americans are used as a buffer between the Black community and the white community because in the 1960s, there was almost a racial reckoning. The white power structure almost had to face accountability for the history of violence against Black people. But instead, Asian Americans were inserted and were pit against each other so that we're always up against each other, and that basically like white supremacy escapes accountability. And the example that I think of that sort of started like the root of a lot of tension is Asian Americans were buying into the negative media stereotypes of Black people. And then in the events that led up to what became known as the LA riots, the LAPD kettled protests away from wealthy white neighborhoods and into Koreatown, and then they left. Um, and we know how that played out. So again, the two communities being pitted against each other, and away from the white power structure. Um, and obviously, the model minority myth is used to oppress the Black community. And there's so much here. I will be getting more into it, but I feel like that's the quickest answer that I can give that gets a little bit into the history. And I'm really curious to know what the Black community and Asian Americans feel about this. But please be patient with me. Thank you.
Hey, you. Do not use Asian Americans as a tool to push your anti-Black bigotry. We do not need or want that.